your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
Well, hello there, world. My name's Jay Katz.
And I'm Aspasia.
And you're on the Untold Radio Network. This is episode 91.
That's correct.
And we are pre-recording, but this will be streaming on the eve of the 55th anniversary of the supposed moon landing. It is called 55 Years of Apollo and still Awaiting is the important word, the A in front of there.
Yeah.
We are joined by who has been termed in the literature and the media as the grandson of the Moon Landing Hoax conspiracy. But this is a highly credentialed gentleman who is not only an astrophysicist, he's a geologist, he's a remarkable author. He's also runs an incredible YouTube channel called Moon Faker. And let me state at the beginning here, for people that may have a problem at looking at both sides of the coin when it comes to Apollo, that it is divisive, but at the same time, it's important that we gather as much information as we can have. Because if we look at the world politically at the moment, we can understand that power does one thing and one thing alone, and it breeds corruption.
Absolutely.
It breeds trouble. So everything needs to be questioned when it comes to absolute power, because I think it corrupts virtually everyone. And at the moment, we are living through Space Race 2 beyond what we'd ever imagined. This time, the world is involved and private industry.
Yes.
And
I think that's where the problem lies.
Well, I think the problem might have laid with people like the figures in power at the time, Lyndon Johnson, John Kennedy, Richard Nixon, who termed it the greatest day since creation, the second greatest day for humanity.
Going straight to hell for that one.
So we just need to acknowledge the elders of the land we'll be broadcasting from, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Thank you, Jarrah, for joining us yet again with your valuable time. We've been looking through those incredible articles on David Percy's site that you've recently put together, and they are so astounding. The Surveyor 3 mystery enthralls me completely. We actually happen to have 16mm film footage of the Surveyor 3 landing here that we will actually have to project before we move through this building for Jarrah. We've got to cook him dinner. We've got to show him those films.
We do.
Anyway, Jarrah, how are you? And welcome to Untold Radio's Down South Anomalies.
Doing well so far. And just first of all, let me just correct you on just one little thing. My YouTube channel is White Jarrah. Basically, my surname first, then my first name.
Okay.
Moon Faker is the actual YouTube series that I put together.
Okay. Well, there's a link. There'll be a link in there.
I think I just got so excited by the Moon Faker, the whole play on James Bond there.
Yeah.
And, I did a piece for Rodeo National this morning about the incredible Christopher Lee and his life. And his mother ended up marrying the uncle of Ian Fleming. Yet again, he became another person that they said could have possibly been the inspiration for James Bond.
There's about like 100 people that have been the inspiration for James Bond.
He had an incredible military career,
yes, he did.
Christopher Lee, by the time he was 25, but we're not going there.
Let's get on track.
Well, you know what amazes me is that we've just seen this released to the public, Fly Me to the Moon, with Channing Tatum and Scarlett Johansson. And here is an interesting thing to me. The timing of the release of this film, and you can watch it streaming now, I think, on Apple TV and numerous other platforms, is really odd. And this does a completely different take to the film that a lot of people say was instigated by Bill Kaysing's book, Capricorn 1. The different take is that they are going to the moon.
They went that they're going to go to the moon, but
It's a spoiler alert here, but at the same time, in parallel, just in case
something happens.
Happens, they're shooting it in a studio with what looks like a very odd, flamboyant version of Stanley Tucci's Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, but so what they're saying there even is like, if something happened, we had this footage that was faked that we were going to show you.
Yeah, that's what they are saying.
So it's not that they did it just in case. It's like that if something did happen, they were going to put that fake landing in its place and pass it off as the landing. So
that actually became the subject matter of a mockumentary that came out a few years back, which was released as an April Fool's joke back in 2003, I think it was, produced by the French. They took a bunch of clips from a previous documentary they had done about Watergate and all that sort of stuff, and basically took it out of context to make it look like Nixon's Nixon's administration officials were admitting that they had faked some footage, in case they had to, couldn't get good pictures out there. But of course, it's there's little hints here and there that it's all a mockumentary. But as for this one, I haven't seen it yet. Just FYI, it gets released tomorrow at the time of our recording, and I plan on seeing it tomorrow in the cinemas. And this is just, I can actually tell you something. I actually saw this thing advertised on the side of a billboard, and on the side of a bus rather.
Right.
Posters that they got on the side of the buses, and I took a photograph of that. I shared it onto Facebook, and I kid you not, that picture I posted went viral. So obviously, it's created quite kind of a buzz. This thing, but this is just my own opinion. But I think it's 100% accurate because you mentioned it's being streamed on Apple TV, and well, coincidentally, Apple TV they also produced a different take on the moon landings. It's called For All Mankind, which is a alternate history. I say that in quotation marks because with alternate history, the idea is you're supposed to take in a moment in time, change something here, and then basically make some educated guesses and explore how to bridge off from that change and stuff. Whereas Apple TV show For All Mankind is basically this premise in which the Soviets are the first to the moon, and the space race never ended as a result of it. But let's just say that their research department was allowed to take a rain check because, we have all these documentation of everything that was supposedly planned after the Apollo program, like the manned Venus flyby or missions to Mars, all this sort of stuff. We even know there was 3 canceled Apollo missions. We know who was supposed to fly those missions, and but for whatever reason, Apple TV they just completely ignore almost all of the historical players and just substitute them with what I like to call thinly veiled surrogates. Like some these fictional characters might be a surrogate for someone else who was involved in that. So like one of the characters has an extramarital affair, which I believe is a reference to one of the Apollo 7 crew. But then again, they got him flying on Apollo 10, suppose, and that there is a whole mystery in and of itself because the entire Apollo 10 crew has been replaced. But anyways, as I was saying, they have all these sets to shoot these scenes in this For All Mankind series, and this is just my own theory. My guess is they wanted to get more mileage out of their moon sets they probably had laying around from the For All Mankind, and I guess, hey, let's just do a whole moon hoax show and see how that works.
Yeah, right.
And the interesting thing is too, we're still in that world, no matter how we perceive it now, where we're being inundated with so much data, so much material, that I believe that entertainment serves a purpose in terms of, we've always been aware that it is a tool of propaganda.
Absolutely.
But it also serves a purpose in actually convoluting the conversation, taking us away from the clarity of points that need to be taken to task and analysed and discussed. And I noticed that with the series of Project Blue Book, they actually reinvented the whole history of J. Allen Hynek and his wife. And in many ways, it was like, hold on, the original information behind Blue Book is astounding.
Absolutely. You don't need to.
What are you doing playing with this to this extent?
Muddy the waters up.
So it makes you really consider the timing, the amount of money in these projects. Why are they going to this extent? I think what they must realize as the bottom line is that people are still questioning
Sure.
and absolutely fascinated. What I'd like to ask you, Jarrah, for people that mightn't have listened to the last podcast we did on Odysseus and Artemis and all that stuff, to just give us some background on yourself and how you came to be involved in questioning the veracity of this.
Well, to start with, you mentioned that I've become known as the grandson of the Apollo Moon Landing Hoax theory, and well, that comes from there's a reference to me taken on after the work of Bill Kaysing. Bill Kaysing was often regarded as the grandfather of the Moon Landing Hoax theory. He was a member of Rocketdyne. He worked as a service analyst, a service engineer, and a technical writer. He would basically take all these reports that the scientists had prepared and basically, dumb them down such that that the higher ups, that the people in Washington could, okay, here's the data that we've got to work with. Here's what progress we were making, and so they could understand, right? And during his time there, he had found. Began to harbor very, very big doubts that they were going to be, meeting Kennedy's goal, right? For he had seen all these problems that were happening with the F1 engines, constantly blowing up on the pad, constantly having combustion instability problems, all this sort of stuff. They even actually had this actually happened during the final years of his career there. There was something called Project First, which was specifically a program to try and solve the combustion instability problems, and even at the end of the day, they had no real guarantee that the problem was solved. It's just, okay, it's slightly more reliable, I guess. But might work, might not, and he became aware of another program there called the Apollo Simulation Project, which was a idea by the Defense Intelligence Agency and all these NASA and all these different people involved with NASA, basically to try and simulate flights to the moon and purport them to be the real thing. This was what was going on at Rocketdyne. He became aware of that, and obviously he had all these security clearances, to access all this kind of information. And basically, he became very. I don't want to say the word disgruntled because he didn't like the term disgruntled ex-employee. He basically became very. What's the word I'm looking for? Maybe
disillusioned.
Yes, disillusioned. That's a good word.
Disillusioned.
Yes, because Yes, he had became basically his bosses at one point. They started to want him to basically, falsify his data.
Yes, so that'd be a problem.
Actually was, and so his policy, he said, honesty is the best, period. And so he didn't want to become part of this anymore, and they would want him to try and downplay the data, downplay the problems that they were having, and and so he left. He resigned from Rocketdyne as a result of that. And so he was the kind of guy who would basically bring, homeless people off the street and give them accommodation, free accommodation and food at his houseboat until they could get back on their feet. And one of the individuals who he had, in fact, actually, before I get to that, let me just say one thing. When the Apollo mission supposedly landed on the moon, he actually didn't watch that when it aired, because he was harboring some doubts because he was aware of all the things that were going wrong at Rocketdyne, all these alternatives they were considering, all these all the shady things and compromising stuff that was taking place. And so he was harboring his doubts that they went there. I guess he wanted to believe, but there was all that thing in the back of his mind thinking, I think they're going to be faking stuff. Anyways, he was having a discussion with one of these homeless people who he brought home one night. His name was John Grant. And he was a Vietnam veteran who had developed post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of being sent to Vietnam and kill civilians, kill people with no good reason. And basically, he turned to drugs and alcoholism as a result of that. And they were chatting one night, and he says, "Bill, I was conned into thinking that what I did was patriotic, but that was all bullshit. Why don't you blow the whistle on this rotten, corrupt government? Why don't you say something outrageous like we never went to the moon?" And of course, he was proposing, why don't you say we never went to the moon as a satirical project? But Kaysing ultimately, based on everything he had seen previously, he ultimately decided to do a serious project on this. In fact, he had actually learned about Thomas Ronald Barron, the safety inspector who dropped down this 500-page report detailing all the poor workmanship, all the safety violations that had gone into the Apollo 1 fire, or Apollo 1 capsule, I should say, which obviously resulted in the 3 astronauts being burned alive. Yep. And 3 days after he had testified before Congress, he was found dead at a railroad crossing. And so Kaysing, he started to investigate that. He acquired the copies of the 50-page report. The 50-page report has survived, but the 501 has disappeared. Probably gone through a paper shredder. Who knows? And he also got a hold of Sam Phillips' report. Sam Phillips was the head of the Apollo project, which, interestingly enough, he had voiced many of the same criticisms as Barrett. An irony right there. And so he ultimately wrote a book on the subject. In fact, I've actually got both editions of the book. Here we go. Here's the first one. We Never Went to the Moon, published in 1974. Right. And later on, he managed. He got some more information, more research, and he got a more polished version out. This is the Desert Publications edition from 1981. And so, yeah, he basically reiterated all these problems that were going on at Rocketdyne, and also dedicated a few sections to photographic anomalies that he noticed in the footage, like the lack of a blast crater underneath the lunar module, and the astronauts appearing, illuminated on the shaded side. Now, Ralph Rene, he was a member of Mensa, the High IQ Society. He had actually picked up on Rene's book, but before that, he was actually contacted by the Rand Corporation. Right, the Rand Corporation, they sent him a letter basically saying, "Hey, do you have any free ideas to give to NASA on space travel?" He had a couple basic patterns for construction tools, and he was a member. As I said, he was a member of Mensa, a High IQ Society, and so they must have done a background search on this guy, and they said, "Okay, let's send him some. Let's see if he has any ideas to contribute." So he sent about 3 or 4 of them, right, and they never get back to him. But sometime while he's waiting for them to get back to him, he picks up on Bill Kaysing's book, and also what's his name? William Bryan's book. William Bryan was a nuclear engineer, and this is a bit of an interesting one here because he noticed a lot of anomalies, like the flag waving in the wind and the astronauts not jumping very high off the ground. But he came to the conclusion that the moon must have stronger gravity, that the moon must have an atmosphere, all these kinds of things. Like he thinks that NASA was trying to hide what they discovered on the moon, and so basically misplaced trust is what it was. In fact, he actually mentions Kaysing here somewhere. I think it was in this section. Which chapter was it? I was actually reading it just before the recording here.
And you own the copyright on both those books now, don't you? Is that just Kaysing's, is it?
No, just Rene's book, but I'll get to that in a second. Here we go. This is what William Bryan writes. He says, at the time of the Apollo missions, a number of observers noticed some of the discrepancies mentioned in this book. People like Bill Kaysing were convinced that the Apollo missions were faked and that all the telecasts and photos were made in some remote place on Earth. Kaysing wrote in a book, 1976, entitled We Never Went to the Moon. If he still believes the moon is airless and only 1/6 gravity of Earth, then he's justified in concluding that the missions were faked. That's what Bryan had to say about this. Yeah, but anyways, Rene, he had read Rene's book, he had read Bryan's book, and sometime after that, he relocated to I think it was in New Jersey. He moved to New Jersey, and around that time, he was sent a copy of a book from the government printing office. It was called America at the Threshold, which was basically this big document touting George H.W. Bush's proposal to send people to the moon and Mars. And he's reading through this thing. Why did I receive this? Finally, he gets to a list of contributors at the very end, right? And he finds his name smack dead in the middle of the appendix. There's all these different contributors, which indicates that at least one of his ideas had to have been approved for the Moon or Mars mission that Bush was proposing back in the 80s. Right. And so here at this point, he was starting to have his doubts that they went to the moon. And now they want to use his name to promote their Mars program. And so he goes over finds Bill Kaysing's contact details, sends him a letter saying, "Hey, Bill, here's what I got on NASA." He sends him a whole list of all these different anomalies that he had noted, because after he had first learned of Kaysing's book, he started reading through all these different books written by the astronauts, noticed various discrepancies in some of their stories, conflicting statements or statements that fly in complete face of what the scientific data should indicate. One of these key issues was the issue of the radiation. He had read James Van Allen's articles about how initially Van Allen was convinced that the radiation would have killed anyone flying through it, and suddenly, now we made a mistake. Basically, retracted at some stage after all this conspiracy theories hit the fan. anyways, Rene, he spoke to Kaysing, basically saying, here's all the data I got on NASA, here's all the anomalies that I've discovered. And Kaysing says, well, why don't you write it into a book? If you do, I'll publish it. And he says, okay, sure. And he started writing a book about that. And he ordered photos of NASA. He found all these different other pictures. He took out of books. He copied down all his notes, wrote down them into a big book. And his book was originally called, where's the book I got?
Is it NASA Mooned America?
Yeah, that's the title he went with. Originally, it was supposed to be called "A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon," which obviously later became the title of
Parts and Bells. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The second working title was it only a paper moon, which obviously became the another title used elsewhere. He settled on NASA Mooned America. Okay, and what happened was that he sent the book off to the manuscript off to Kaysing, and unfortunately, Kaysing didn't publish it. His wife had turned ill, and he, dedicated all the funds to publishing to try to look after her and stuff. So then he turned to found Jimmy Collier, who was a reporter who wrote the book "The Scam: The Stealing of America," and he got interested in it. But then he decided to do his own research along these lines, and he ended up producing a documentary called "Was It Only a Paper Moon?" And so finally, he got fed up a bit, and so he ended up publishing it himself. Right, and so that's how it has been, and so. Now I come along, basically. Well, actually, Sabrell came along and Percy came along as well in the meantime and stuff. Percy was a close friend of they're both close friends of Kaysing. Percy, he had noticed a lot of photographic anomalies in the and as a photographer, he was very versed in this topic. And Sabrell, he had actually seen Bill Kaysing on a TV show some years back and got in touch with him and decided to make a documentary about, well, maybe it might have happened. Then he receives the footage that shows them faking being halfway to the moon. And that became the subject matter of his documentary. A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. Now, I came along around sometime after this. I had grown up being a huge fan of space exploration, and as a matter of fact, I was brought up by all the hype. I wanted to be the first man on Mars. In fact, I'll show you this here. This is one of my childhood books. This is one of my childhood books here. Look, I'll show you the stuff that they were teaching us back in those days. Where is it? Here we go. Look at this. They're talking about we'll be on Mars by 2019. It actually says 2019 there.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that did not happen, obviously. And so, but it was always the same thing. They would announce all these bold plans to return to the moon or send people to Mars, and they would just turn around and it would cancel it. And
well,
so
the deadline dates used to come and go, and they'd get put back and back and back, and here we are.
But they were training astronauts for Mars. The unmaking of an American astronaut by Brian. I've forgotten.
Brian O'Leary.
Brian O'Leary.
You can train people to do things. That doesn't mean that they're going to do them.
They were doing that in the 60s, and his book is very illuminating in terms of something else going on there as well. There's not bold statements, but he had so many question marks that he actually left the program.
Yeah, he did. He did.
We'll also try and find a link. I believe, was it a Paper Moon? There is a copy on YouTube of that, and that is a David and Goliath, especially when he gets up to, is it the Smithsonian and goes to measure the doorway on the lamb? That is
on the lamb.
An astounding moment.
I love that. I love that documentary. It's hilarious.
Yes, I remember that.
So what happened? What was the turning point? How did you find out about these books? What was the turning point for you, Jarrah?
Well, I had first seen a TV program about the Moon Landing Hoax, and I can't remember which program it was, but basically I'd seen this program. I had learned of Bill Kaysing, I had learned of Rene, I'd learned of all the other players and stuff. And so rather than just dismissing this as a rumor, I was a huge fan of space exploration. I was a huge fan of astronomy, and so I had turned back to everything I had read previously about about space and about space travel. I found all their books, I found all their videos. I basically rather than just here's their work and just dictated that, I actually went back to found all their footnotes. All the Ralph Rene, for example, he has an enormous list of references at the end of his book.
Right.
And I literally went down and tracked all of these books that he had cited in his all this report. And I tracked down them and I looked through everything and realized, I see where he's getting at. And but along the way, of course, I also encountered many pro NASA websites which were supposedly they were calling themselves Apollo hoax debunk websites, but in fact they were really just trying to pull the wool over their readers' eyes, because when you read all these pro NASA websites, you find that they are trying to mislead people without access to not just the conspiracy videos and books and whatever, but also their source material. And this after Bill Kaysing passed away in 2005, that became even more apparent when these pro NASA websites literally just danced on his grave, for lack of a better expression. Okay, like one of the things, there was this one fellow by the name of Phil Plate, who runs the Bad Astronomy website, and he had a blog. Yeah, he posted a blog article about Kaysing's death, and basically said that Kaysing said any space travel is impossible. That's a complete lie, because in the first of all, he has a web section on his website where he responds to the video Conspiracy Theory: Did We Land on the Moon?, which was a Fox TV show that Kaysing appeared on. In that program, right, Kaysing specifically says that the astronauts orbited the Earth for 8 days. Right, I think orbiting the Earth is space travel. Right. And in the book as well, he cites various other, space missions as either proof of concept as to how to pull off a hoax, or as evidence, cross comparisons, with all the different anomalies that he's seen in the Apollo photographs. He's got all this data from that could only be possible with space exploration. Proposes using space travel to pull off such a hoax, such that people would be fooled. And yet Plate is going around saying, "Oh, he denied any space travel was impossible." Okay, that was a bold-faced lie, and that was literally the tipping point. And I felt, okay, it's time to somebody to take a stand against these people. And so I'd done my film and TV course around this point, and so I figured, okay, I'm going to type up an essay. Well, originally it was supposed to be a long essay. It ended up being the size of a phone book, and so I ended up adapting it into a video series. That's how Moonfaker came about.
Right.
And that is an incredible video series, White Jarrah. You need to go to that site and check it out.
We'll
I'm just
put a
going to
link to it.
visually, for those people up on YouTube and Facebook and other visual sites, not audio, I'll just run through the covers of these books again so people have got clarity. But they can actually go to you to purchase the Bill Kaysing book. Is that right? Because I believe that Amazon is selling it and they don't have the right to do that. And I think that's their cover that they've put together. Is that right?
It's actually Ralph Rene's book that I own. After Rene had died,
right,
He's got
sorry.
Ralph Rene's.
That's the illegal copy right there. That's the illegal copy of Ralph Rene's book. What they did was they found an updated edition from 1994, and they just, I've never seen that cover, but they basically published it without permission in writing to reprint this.
Wow.
So,
okay. Well, how do people actually?
I was just going to say, I think they've done the same. Everyone's talking at the same time. I think they've done the same with Bill Kaysing's book as well.
Right.
I got. I don't remember where I purchased Rene's. Where I purchased Kaysing's copy from. It might have been from Amazon. It might be a later reprinting as well. But the content is exactly the same as the original stuff inside. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we can put a link.
I would recommend if you find it. I would recommend getting the 1981 edition of Kaysing's book. That one has some more information in it. And if you want to get, you probably find that on eBay, hopefully. And if you want to get Ralph Rene's book, go to ralphrene.com. That's where you'll get the book from. I keep it in print the same way he did.
Right, brilliant. And of course, here's is this the Moongate book? That's another different cover to the Moongate book. And I've also Mr. Percy's work, Dark Moon.
Yeah,
Bart
That's the original.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've got a copy of that.
Mm-hmm.
I find all this literature highly fascinating. And here's the latest book by Bart Sibrel. What about the work that Randy Walsh has done? How do you feel about his work, Jarrah?
Well, I haven't seen his as in depth as I have all the others and stuff, but I believe I got a few mentions in that book, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I have not read them as yet either. Here's the original odd one. Yeah, the Moongate.
Yeah.
Okay. That is absolutely fascinating. So you reach that point where you decided, look, I'm really, I'm pro space, I'm pro the entire project, but I need to look at the work of these people dissenting and then realize, my God, there is something here and there's some deception. Isn't it ironic that he calls his site Bad Astronomy? I don't think that name works for him at all.
Yes, I think it's kind of ironical that he should choose that because, the stuff he's putting out can only be described as bad astronomy.
Have you actually read through the late Dave McGowan's? I don't think he ever got to publish it, but it's online, Wagging the Moon Doggy, because he really has a problem with our friend behind Bad Astronomy. Do you know his work at all? Wagging the Moon Doggy?
I haven't read it in depth. I have heard of him, though. I remember reading some of it somewhere.
I think he should have.
Has he?
Yeah,
Did he write a book? No, he didn't.
He wrote a book. It's online, and there's an
Right.
audio version of
Yeah.
it and a visual version.
Yeah.
I think you actually need to see it because Dave is actually got a joyous, sarcastic wit.
He has.
He's a brilliant writer, and he was the man behind the dark scenes in Laurel Canyon, and Program to Kill, and numerous other books. And of course, his subject matter has always been difficult, and looking at that counterfoil, that counterpoint to the reality that's sold to us, but he is more than worthy of taking a look at. And I think he's done a very reasonable job with Wagging the Moon Doggy. If you just punch it into your normal Google engine, you'll find there's actually 12 major links to it.
So can I ask you, Jarrah, what is considered space travel?
Well, space travel is when it actually depends on how you define the altitude of space. For the United States, they like to be a little bit different. They like to say space begins at 85 kilometers up, whereas most other people go by the Kármán line, which is above 100 kilometers.
Right. Where does the space station sit in regards to,
Okay, the ISS, the International Space Station, orbits at about 360 kilometers.
Up.
Yes.
Which is from way before the Van Allen belts begin, isn't it?
That's correct. The Van Allen belts, they begin at about 1,000 kilometers up.
Right.
And they extend to about 25,000 kilometers. Now, this comes with a bit of an asterisk and stuff because you might read people saying that it goes all the way out to 60,000 kilometers. Well, yes and no. You see, the for all intents and purposes, they end at about 25,000 kilometers up to 60,000. You got all these very, very low energy electrons up there. They're relatively easy to shield against. Okay, but everything underneath there is stuff you got to be concerned about. They're most intense at about 2,000 kilometers up and in the inner belt, and about something like 15,000 kilometers up in the outer belt. In those two regions, you see there's electrons with energies up to 15 mega electron volts. That means they can go very far. A mega electron volt proton, the 50 mega electron volt protons, they can penetrate the walls of the command module and irradiate the people inside. And similarly, the inner belt is particularly rich in high energy protons. Right, anything greater than 8 mega electron volts is what can go through the spacecraft. And as a matter of fact, I actually have one of the books by the original NASA researchers, or group of researchers, I should say. This is Astronautical Engineering and Science, which was written in honor of Werner von Braun's birthday. And there's a section here called Problems in Shielding the Radiation of Space Vehicles. This was written by J.W. Keller and various other scientists who worked at the Marshall Space Flight Center. You can see them.
What year is that book from?
1963.
Right. Okay.
1963. And in that, they actually state that in order to bring the proton dose down such that you would only receive about 1 rem per hour, you would need about 100 grams per square centimeter of shielding. So if the material is water, that would be about a meter of water shielding surrounding the life capsule.
Right. Okay.
Now, weren't we told that the launch trajectory was a window in the Van Allen belt where they could actually pass through with the least amount of radiation?
Really?
I'm speaking very naively here. I certainly do not have an astrophysics background.
Not either.
But what do you think of that assessment, that they've got this little tiny window that they can actually pierce the Van Allen belt at its lowest amount of radiation by going on an angular flight path?
Well, first of all, I think you might be referring to the cones of escape, as Van Allen called them. You see where the poles end at the poles.
That's
There's
right. Yes.
like an angle of a cone of escape, as Van Allen would call them. Right. To get into that, you would either need to launch from the poles or get into a polar orbit, which is basically a trajectory that crosses both the North and South Pole per orbit. You see.
Right.
Now, the Apollo spacecraft, in fact, all American spacecrafts, they tend to launch on a trajectory that's inclined to the equator by 30 degrees. Okay, and so the cones of escape, they become negligible depending on which side of the Earth you're talking about. They tend to become negligible around 60 to 80 kilometers. 60 to 80 degrees relative to the equator. Okay, and so obviously, if you actually look at the numbers attributed to the outbound trajectory, in fact, there's an article on Ollis that I helped co-wrote. It's written by the late Xavier. What was his name? Let me get the article up here.
You actually go back up on the field.
Yeah, written by the late Xavier Pascal. All right, so he provided all this data that NASA has put out regarding the trajectory, and if you look at the coordinates here, you can see that the spacecraft never got any higher trajectory-wise than about 32 degrees.
Right.
32 degrees south of the equator. And so for it to become negligible, as I said, you would need to have a trajectory around 60 degrees above the equator, which obviously the Apollo spacecraft, they did not do. And in fact, I actually got the coordinates. You see, there was one of the propagandists I mentioned, and this is a interesting story about this. He goes by the name of Robert Brainick. He has a website that's dedicated to space technology and space travel and the like. For the longest time, he actually had a section on his website, trying to debunk the Apollo mission. Sorry, trying to debunk the Apollo moon hoax. And he originally was just one article here, okay, point by point here, blah, 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 all the usual crap. Then he created a dedicated article trying to debunk mathematically the claims that the radiation would have been lethal. And so what he used for that, he used the coordinates that have been attributed to the Apollo spacecraft, Apollo 11 specifically, and he plugged those coordinates into the AP8 model. The AP8 is the industry standard model for proton fluxes. Basically how much. Okay, you got this much area, and you got this many particles traveling through it per second. That's basically what this thing will tell you based on the coordinates. The coordinates are listed in terms of magnetic shell strength and B over B naught values.
Right.
And so it's easier to explain if you've got the pictures and stuff. But basically,
you know what? I think I've got those. Is this the data that you sent me?
Yeah, that's actually my own calculations. I'll tell you that in just a second. But basically, if you go to the other picture that I sent you.
Is this one on the belts or this?
Yes, that's my. What I did was the column where it says L and B over B naught. Those are the coordinates that Brainick used. Right now, what I took the liberty of, right? He basically tried to downplay the whole thing. Basically, implied that any radiation greater than 100 would go 100 MeV would go straight through the astronauts. Right. Well, no. According to that book that I just mentioned, the radiation, any radiation that's greater than 8 MeV is going to go through the spacecraft walls. Okay, and the human body will do a good job of attenuating this stuff. And then just to put this into perspective, in proton therapy, you know how proton therapy works, don't you? That's basically where they accelerate protons to a certain energy such that it'll only penetrate as far as the tumor that they're trying to target. Okay, right. The radiation in the Van Allen belt is literally in the same energy range as what they use in proton therapy. So the idea that anything greater than 100 MeV would go straight through the astronauts is a joke. Like they use 200 MeV protons to target tumors in the chest, for example. And so basically what Brainick was saying was he was claiming that any proton less than 100 MeV would be stopped in the spacecraft shielding, and anything greater than 100 MeV would go clean through the spacecraft, clean through the astronauts, and deposit little energy. Well, obviously he was trying to downplay that. And so what I did was I took his coordinates and I basically got all the data, these are the fluxes, and then I calculated. If you go back to the previous picture you just showed. Yes, for each proton flux that I got, I would basically convert that into the dose rate. So if you see here protons per square centimeter per second, that would be basically what would be the AP8 would spit out. Okay, I would multiply that by the surface area of the human, and I would convert seconds to hours. Okay, then I would multiply that by the surface area of the human, which is 2 square meters. Okay, now we got out how many protons per hour is striking the astronaut. Okay, now I want to find out, okay, how much energy is in there? Well, we already know what the energy level is. Each flux has its own corresponding energy level, you see, and so I would just plug in the energy in MeV where it goes, and that would give us how much MeV per hour. Okay, now I want to convert it to joules. Then I convert that into grays, which is a radiation unit. In this case, I would divide that by the body mass of the human. Okay, and now the average body mass is about 75 kilograms. And then that gives me the radiation in grays per hour. And the last step is optional, but you can convert it to rads per hour and rads per minute if you choose. Now that will give you the absorbed dose. There's still one final step to do, or actually 2 final steps rather. And if you go to the other picture I sent you.
Right. Okay. Gee whiz, you are leaving me back at the starting gate here, but this is quite astounding. Keep going.
Yes. Okay. So obviously, what I've done is I've got all the protons with energies between 8 MeV and 400 MeV. Okay. That I've got the absorbed doses. Now I want to multiply that by the Q factor or the radiation weight factor. You see, to convert it to equivalent dose, which is basically tells you how effective the dose will be to humans and whatnot. Right. You basically need to multiply it by a radiation weight factor. Now for protons, the weight factor is 5. Okay. Later, at some time in the early 2000s, they downconverted the weight factor to 2. Who knows why? But looking at I actually compared my calculations to studies made by other people. Like for studies of solar flares, and I found the Q factor of 5 is more accurate. Okay, so I did that. And now this was actually not mentioned by Rene, but he was actually quoted as saying the AP8 model is the Bible of aniline protons. Those are his words, the Bible of aniline proton fluxes. And so he was adamant that, if it's not in the AP8, it doesn't exist. This is the definitive thing. Well, no, if you actually read studies by radiation measurements, because see what the AP8 is, it's basically derived from averages of various satellites that went up there to measure the belts in the late 60s and early 1970s. Okay, and it doesn't take into consideration the dynamics of the belt. It has a model for the solar maximum and a model for the solar minimum, right? But it doesn't really take into consideration the dynamics of the belt, such as injection events or the fluctuations and this and that, you see. And so what you'll find is that many times when astronomers do their predictions for how much radiation they expect to see, and then they send a probe up around this part of space, and suddenly they're detecting much more radiation than they expect. Well, obviously that's an indication that the AP had underpredicted the doses. Now I was reading for some papers, and I found a correction factor of 3 is appropriate for spacecraft on the same inclination and the same trajectory as the Apollo spacecraft. Okay, and so I take my absorbed dose, I multiply it by the radiation weight factor, then I multiply it by the correction factor, and you can see when we do all this stuff, we find out that the body dose for the 2-way trip, that would be about 100 rads. Okay, and for the skin dose, you see, in addition to the organs and the bones and whatnot being irradiated, you also have skin burns associated with getting struck by all this radiation. And so the body dose tends to be a tiny fraction of the skin dose. And so doing the calculations, we find there would be nearly 1,600 rads for the skin and about 100 rads for the body. Now that's life-threatening. 100 rads is life-threatening. Okay, and 1,600 rads for the skin. That's close to receiving erythema. The severe reddening of the skin associated with the sunburns.
Right.
There's no reports about such skin burns or serious illnesses associated with being exposed to this kind of radiation. And
for how long?
How long? Put all this together in the video. Go ahead.
How long do you have to be, exposed to that kind of radiation before it's, like really bad for you?
Well, any short-term exposure to anything measured in hundreds of rads is considered fatal. Like many people reckon that if you receive 500 rads in almost instantaneously or over an hour or several minutes or so, you're pretty much dead. Right. If you receive it over a lifetime, well, you'll live, but you'll probably end up with cancer someday way down the thing. It all depends on the time, you see.
So how?
But, what I really want to mention here, though, is that
So the
ahead.
astronauts traveling to the moon, they would have gone through the Van Allen belt. How long would
They would
they
have
have been
had to.
exposed?
They would have had
They would
to.
have
And
had
how
Yeah,
long?
yeah, if they went through. So how did any of them get, like, because how long were they exposed at what levels to?
Well, and I think what you're saying is how long did it take them to get through the
Well,
belts? And radiation is not like rain. As
No.
Jarrah was just saying
Well,
there, instantaneous exposure means
yeah, you
instantaneous
can't
damage.
dry off and it's gone.
But how long are
Once
they
you've
in the
been-
belts? And there's 3 belts,
So if you look back
supposedly.
at
Is that
if you
right?
look back at my if you look back at the graph that I had showed you, the table and stuff, where I showed all the different things, you can see the column for time. Like this, this starts at 5 minutes. This is 5 minutes after translunar injection, which is where
Right.
they light the third stage a second time to fire them out to the moon and stuff. And you can see the time that is supposed to be attributed to the time in the inner belt. Now, mind you, I can only calculate the inner belt. Okay, for the outer belt, unfortunately, the AE8 rather doesn't give the radiation that would have gone through the spacecraft. So all I could really count was the inner Van Allen belt. But for the outbound trajectory, the time it takes to pass through was about 30 minutes or something like that, and about another 30 minutes to pass through the outer belt. Okay,
Right.
And so. Yeah. Well, anyways, after I did all these calculations, and I released a video called "Moonfaker Radiation Reloaded," which literally raked Brannig under the coals over his attempts to downplay the radiation hazard and all this half troops. He would literally go through his way to find something out of like just to put this in perspective, right? He was claiming that the Apollo spacecraft shielding would be enough to stop 100 MeV protons. Right? What was his source for that? He found a table which was derived from data dating back to 1936 or something, which was literally back when particle accelerators were in their infancy. Okay, and they could only achieve things of about 5 MeV protons. That's how fast they could accelerate particles. This was long before they had nuclear reactors or anything like that. Long before they could really had a good ground information of the stuff. So he was literally cherry picking everything he could find to try and downplay the amount of radiation the astronauts should receive. Yeah. I exposed all this in my video, Moonfaker Radiation Reloaded. Literally shortly after he does this, what does he do, Brannig? He deletes every single mention of the moon hoax from his website.
Right. Okay.
No explanation, just delete.
Okay.
Well, the absence of evidence.
So, I mean, they say that they get, they get radiation even being in high or
cosmic particles.
Yeah, up in the space station. So, I mean, how long can astronauts stay up there before they start to really get sick and get overloaded with radiation?
But they're not even anywhere near the Van Allen.
No, but I'm just talking about at the space station, which is in low Earth orbit.
Displacement.
Yeah. Well, many astronauts who have been on the ISS for long periods, people who have been staying up there for many months on end or even years, they've come back and one or another they've developed cataracts in the eyes or some damage to the bone marrow and stuff like that. But you've got to understand that the radiation that you get in the low Earth orbit. Well, first of all, you see the reason why the belts exist in the first place is because the Earth has a magnetic field. You see, the magnetic field it's generated by the core and it circles the Earth. And so what happens is when the sun throws a fit and basically shucks all this radiation at us, all these solar flares and the like, the radiation actually gets channeled into the down through the magnetic field lines, and some of it actually gets trapped in the belt. Some of it just gets funneled down into the polar regions, and you can see it as an aurora. Okay, but most of it ends up trapped in the Van Allen radiation belts. And so, when you're sending astronauts into space, what you want to do is you want to keep them below the radiation belt.
Sure.
You want to keep them about a few hundred kilometers above. And there is a region of the Van Allen belt that actually dips lower than usual. It's called the South Atlantic Anomaly. And I'll get this out of the way because it'll probably show up in the comments sooner or later and stuff. Many propagandists like to cite this. See, there's this region called the South Atlantic Anomaly where it dips lower than usual. Okay, now the shuttle astronauts, the ISS astronauts, they will go through that anomaly every 7 or 9 orbits. You see, right? But the radiation there, because it's the fluxes there are such that you would only receive something like 2 rads per hour. Okay, and so the time you spend outside of that thing, remember, we're only going in there every 7 or every 9 orbits, and so your body has some time to do some repairs to the damage that's inflicted upon you after you've been into this state. But the main part of the belt where the Apollo crews are supposed to have gone, that wouldn't have given you that kind of luxury, to do some repair to your bodies and come back safely. Now there's another mission that's actually coming up soon. I think it's called what was it called? You might want to edit out this dead space and stuff, but
there's no editing.
There's no editing with us. We're live, and that's the way we like it. That's honesty.
Yeah.
And you know what? The one thing I'm sitting here, I'm bamboozled by this science because I don't understand it as well. And I'm sure that can be used for us and used against us. But have you had any reaction to this video you put out there about this information? Do you get positive reactions? Are there scientists? Are there people with credentials that have been in touch with you? Or does it fall under dead ears? What's the story, Jarrah?
Well, half and half, really. There's during my astrophysics degree and even during my geology degree in particular and stuff, I became something of what I'd like to call a scientific minority. In fact, I was actually had this one occasion when we were doing geophysics, and we would basically had to do some experiments, trying to measure things underground, with seismic surveys, magnetic surveys. We actually had one thing where we took a what's called a gravitometer, which we used to measure the gravity strength of different regions, and we would use this to try to detect these underground tunnels. Right. And so we went off in separate cars, and I kid you not, one of my peers actually mentioned to the teacher, she was riding with the teacher, that I doubt the moon missions and stuff. And the teacher in question had actually co-wrote a paper with Harris and Schmidt, the only geologist supposedly to go to the moon. And let me tell you, it was something of a discussion when we got to the thing. I literally remember nothing of that field trip and stuff, because literally the first thing that as soon as I arrived, the guy says to me, "So you don't like the moon landings, Jarrah?" And I say, "It's not that I don't like them. I don't believe they happened." And it was a back and forth between like all the different anomalies in the rocks. Like he was saying, "Oh, the rocks are devoid of water." Well, no, I've got papers here that say they got up to 6,000 parts per million of water. They don't have, and he was saying, "Oh, we got meteorites from there that are, comparable to the rocks." And I say, "Are these the meteorites that were thought to be eucrites?" That's a meteorite from Vesta, the asteroid. And he says, "Oh, before we had the Apollo samples." I say, "No, after we had the Apollo samples." I was citing all the numbers of the identification numbers of all the rocks and stuff. And so we'd set up the gravitometer. We'd punch in the settings and stuff while we were waiting it for it to do its magic. He would turn to me, he would say, "Oh, Jarrah, what about this? What about that?" It would that's literally all I remember of that particular field trip. But just going back to the radiation just a second ago, I remember I found the mission I was about to mention and stuff. This is a private mission here. It's called Polaris Dawn, which is supposed to actually take a this also applies to Gemini 11, but a lot of propagandists like to take this out of context, you see. See, what this Polaris Dawn mission is supposed to do, it's supposed to launch initially on an elliptical orbit, which will take it up to about 1,400 kilometers, which would take it into the innermost edge of the inner belt, you see. And people, they say they like to present this out of context. In fact, that Phil Plait that I mentioned earlier, he went on record. He went on a radio show. I think it was his debate with Joe Rogan. He went on there saying that and I quote, the Gemini missions went deep into the heart of them and stayed there to make sure that it was safe to. Well, no, that's not what they did at all. The Gemini 11 and what's supposed to be happening on Polaris Dawn, they only made 2 highly elliptical orbits like this, whoop, and then back down again. Whoop. So all you do is just kiss to the innermost edge of the belt and then come straight back down again. That's how they set that. Well, for the longest time, that had me confused about a lot of things, because you read all these propaganda websites that are trying to say, "Oh, well, the Gemini missions, they went in there no problem and stuff." Well, that's until you look at the actual specifics. They didn't tag around. In fact, for the long, before the repeated flights into the South Atlantic anomaly, they were actually fearing the astronauts would get as much as 19 rads for the missions. That was, of course, before we knew that they could, they do some recovery outside the anomaly and stuff.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Well, all right. So, can you tell me why they suppose they went to the moon 6 times. One time they couldn't land, Apollo 13, but they were able to bring the astronauts back safely. And then after all that, they scrapped the Saturn, the Saturn V, the Apollo, the launch, the delivery system of men onto the moon and then safely back home. Why they scrapped that and then gave us the space shuttle, which actually couldn't fly to the moon. Can you explain that to me? That's one thing that I've never been able to understand. It's like what you usually do is like you've got something that works, and what you do is you build on that and you refine that and you tweak it and make it better and just technically just keep going forwards and forwards and forward until you get something that is, it can go to the sun and back. Do you know what I mean?
I understand what you're getting at.
Yeah, but why did they do that? Did they ever say why they did that? That the reasoning for that they went actually backwards?
I think they actually said funding at one point, but
yes, funding is usually the excuse behind that.
But how much did it cost to actually develop the space shuttle?
In current currency, there would be about. The space shuttle would be about. In current currency, about $400 billion.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, like, you already had a delivery system that worked really well, right? Supposedly, right? It's worked well. So what you do, and you've paid, what was it, $30 billion or $40 billion at the time?
It was $40 billion. Today would be about $200 billion.
But every time they went to the moon with that, they didn't have to develop something new. It got cheaper and cheaper every time they went to the moon, right? Because they'd already developed it. But what they did is they went 6 times and then they scrapped that whole thing and then started a new project to get people into space. But this, the shuttle, the space shuttle, was never going to be able to go to the moon. This is what I'm trying to understand. You already had, the funding. You didn't want to fund to go to the moon anymore. So what you did, you scrapped this thing that was actually going into outer space, like really traveling into outer space, went to the moon, and then you scrapped it and you gave us a vehicle that actually was never going to be able to go to the moon. And that was funded. That was, new funding started from scratch. So don't give me the funding wasn't there. It was there. They just put it into something else that actually couldn't go to the moon.
Yeah, this is my response to that stuff is because it didn't. The reason the Saturn V and the Apollo program was scrapped is simply because they had met the objective that Kennedy had set. Supposedly, the idea was let's land a man on the moon and bring him back. Okay. That now the scientific community, they had all these other bold ideas and stuff like that. Oh, let's send him off to Mars. Let's build a base on the moon. Let's do this. Let's do that. Okay. But obviously that wasn't Kennedy's objective. The objective is met. Now they need a reason to try to get out of it. Right. Well, okay. Originally it was supposed to end at Apollo 20 before they move on to moon bases and Mars missions, that sort of thing. Well, Apollo 20 conveniently needed to be cancelled because they needed to use the Saturn V to launch the Skylab station. Okay. Then Apollo 13 comes along, and that near disaster, supposed near disaster, leads to the cancellation of Apollos 18 and 19. I'm sure had things been differently, they probably would have wanted to cancel everything after Apollo 13 as well. But they just, made do with the last few missions they had to work with and stuff. They would basically, fake those, and then and let's focus on getting back to some real space exploration now. So after that was the Skylab missions, and there was Apollo Soyuz, which was where they had the Apollo dock with a Russian Soyuz capsule. Then later on came the space shuttle, which was a whole new kettle of fish, because there was for the longest time between 1975 and 1981, there was a period when space was literally now dominated by the Soviets. There was all these Soyuz capsules going up there. They had their own space station mission and stuff. And whereas America was stuck on the ground. In fact, the shuttle, you might remember the movie Moonraker with Roger Moore and stuff, how they were launching space shuttles from what was it called, Vandenberg, as early as 1979. That's literally no exaggeration. That was actually the mindset of people back in the day. They were expecting to launch space shuttles back in the late 70s. In fact, there was one plan to actually have the shuttle dock with the Skylab so they could boost it up into a higher orbit so they could, do some future work on that. That never came about, but the shuttle was so behind it ended up launching too late to save Skylab. And so there's another interesting factor that I like to bring up. We talked earlier about the George H.W. Bush's proposals to send people to the moon and Mars. One proposal that was actually on the table at the time was called Early Lunar Access, which was a proposal to put a two-man Apollo capsule inside the shuttle bay, right? They would launch that into space, have that dock in the Earth orbit with a Centaur, a Centaur rocket, which they would use as a booster to send it out to the moon. Now, this was considered something sort of almost a cross between Earth orbit rendezvous and direct ascent, because the probe wasn't even intended to enter lunar orbit before. It was actually literally sent, for all intents and purposes, on a if anything goes wrong, a collision course and trajectory and stuff, because the idea is we'll send it straight to the moon without entering lunar orbit first and just land it there, slow it down, and anything goes wrong, fly back away and stuff. That was literally one of the proposals back in the days, but of course it didn't survive into the Clinton administration. And one way or another, there's always been proposals by the U.S. presidents whenever they need votes or approval ratings. They always hype up some plan for space travel. Worked for Kennedy. Should have worked for Kennedy if he wasn't assassinated, I should say. But that helped. Use this to get some approval ratings, and then as soon as the next one comes along.
Okay, all right. So all those times that they weren't really serious about going, obviously. So, but when they started to become serious about actually going back to the moon, why didn't they just go back to the Saturn V? Because it had a better track record than it. Well, it's the only track record, right? So why didn't they just go back there and start working on that and improving that? Because they already had proof that it went to the moon. So if it went five times, well, it went 6 times but didn't land, one of the times, right? Why didn't they just, expand on that research? Because they keep telling us they went in those. So why didn't they they'd already done
build on that research.
Build on that research. They already had it. It was proven, it was tested, and they didn't have to, reinvent, start a new rocket, a new research and funding. Why didn't they just go back to this, to the plans and the schematics and just build on that? The
short answer is, I think Don Pettit actually answered this himself. He said that technology was destroyed after the Apollo project was cancelled. That in there itself is something of a half truth, because you still got the Saturn V vehicles on display at Kennedy Space Center or wherever it is and stuff.
How do you destroy stuff like that? The greatest day since this,
Well, we had that moment at Edwards Air Force Base where they rolled open a hangar on the tarmac there, on the flight line, and they showed us a LEM, and they said they'd found this LEM in a scrap metal yard.
Yep.
And we were like, what?
Yeah. And it was days away from being, crushed and destroyed.
And we're thinking, what's this all about?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, to lose all that telemetry to begin with is very strange.
Why would you get rid of that telemetry?
It reminds me of your man removing all the data of his site pertaining to the moon hoax. It just makes you really wonder. And now when we look at Starship X, we're looking at many launches of Starship X primarily to get fuel into low Earth orbit so they can travel to the moon. How did they do that in the first place without a fuel delivery system up there?
Well,
I don't understand this science, and Jarrah understands it a bit better than we do. I'm just asking a question here, but calm.
Yeah, no, I know, but it's like you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that there's something wrong with this whole thing. We went in 1969, and God forbid that you should even say that we didn't go, right? Everybody's up in arms and they're trying to convince you. I don't know why they're trying to convince you so hard. Everybody can believe what they want. But
because your credibility is at stake. This was hundreds of thousands of people, billions of dollars.
But now but now we can't. Now you've just thrown me off my game.
Okay, let's go back to Jarrah, where the real truth lies. Maybe, who knows?
Oh, that's what I was saying. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that there's something that system should have been, worked on and developed even further. It's like like mobile phones when they first came out and where mobile phones are now. Okay. It's like you can see this. Yeah. Well, when they came out, they were just like these bricks and you could only just ring someone and talk to them and that was it. Now people's lives are attached. Everything is in this phone, right? A mobile phone. It's like your whole life is in there. All your information, you can do a billion, so many things with it. And you need it to actually live your life. I mean, Jamie and I don't have mobile phones and the problems that we have just getting into, Jamie wanted to go to the ABC today to do
I did go to the
yeah,
ABC.
you went to the ABC, but as soon as he said I don't have a mobile phone, it was like, bells and whistles going off, you can't come in here. I mean, I've been I've been told that I can't go into a venue to perform because I don't have a mobile phone. It's like, what do you need my mobile phone for? But this is
You're digressing.
no, I know
badly.
I've digressed, but I'm just trying to show you that, mobile phones when they first came out and where they are like 30 years later, yet
We don't
this
need one to get to space now.
we went to the moon 55 years ago and now we can't go to the moon 55 years later. That doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, exactly. The logical thought of progression would be that you would have bases on the moons of Jupiter by now.
Exactly. I'd say we should have been able to fly to the sun and back.
When it comes to the Starship, I would like to mention the stuff about the Starship and stuff because that in itself is a whole different kettle of fish in itself. Because I've been following SpaceX since they were proposing the stuff back in the early 2010s, right? What Elon Musk was proposing back when it was still called the Falcon 20, he was for all intents and purposes proposing a modern day equivalent of the Nova rocket. Like we see how big the Saturn V is, right? The Nova rocket was literally something that was so gigantic that the actual idea was to launch it not from Cape Canaveral, but from silos carved into the mountains of Hawaii, because they feared that if it blew up on the pad, there would be this enormous explosion that would have destroyed an entire city, That was actually the mindset back in those days. So basically he was proposing essentially a modern day equivalent.
Isn't this similar, Jared, to what Von Braun was writing about? There is no way we can get there unless we build something that massive. Von Braun was making those statements in the mid-50s, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. He was an advocate for Earth orbit rendezvous in those days, which was the idea where you would send either an empty ship up there, then you send up the tanks, pump it up there and stuff, and then go to there. The direct descent launches, which is what was considered initially for Apollo, right? That requires an even bigger rocket because now you've got to carry the not just the landing legs and the landing fuel there, but you also got to need the fuel that you need to return to the Earth, and also the heat shield, which adds all extra mass to the thing. And so that means you need a much bigger rocket now. The idea to bring it down was what they called lunar orbit rendezvous, which is where they would have one craft dedicated to just landing on the moon, which doesn't require a heat shield or anything like that, and one craft which is a mothership to take them back. But of course, you don't have the shielding, which you add the shielding, suddenly you're back to needing a Nova rocket again. And
right. Yeah.
When Elon Musk first proposed this Starship, it was called Nova. It was called Falcon 20 back in those days. It's gone through so many revisions that I don't even recognize it anymore. What he proposed back then was a modern day equivalent of the Nova. What he's delivered, for all intents and purposes, is a modern day equivalent of the N1. The N1 was the Soviet equivalent to the Saturn V, which had like 30 engines in the first stage alone. And if you actually look at the launch of these things, it doesn't even have enough propellant to get into orbit. Because the Falcon 20, the Starship is a two-stage rocket. You've got the lower stage with 30 engines, and you've got the upper stage, which is supposed to double as the spacecraft to go to the moon and back. Okay. Well, if you look at the actual launches, you can notice that the speed of the rocket once it does second stage cutoff, once it shut down the engines, you notice it's not even traveling fast enough to be in orbit. It's just a hair under the speed needed to get into Earth orbit. So for all intents and purposes, it's a suborbital flight. And this is my own opinion, but I think it's 100% accurate. I think because you got all this empty space, you got say this is the starship. Okay,
Yep.
this section here would be empty space, which they're using to supposed to house the people or the cargo or whatever. This lower section is just what he's used to put it into Earth orbit. But even that's not enough to get him into Earth orbit and stuff. My theory, this is just what I think, is he should, instead of trying to make the spacecraft and the upper stage one unit, he should just make it a dedicated upper stage, fill the entire thing up with propellant, and use it to launch a dedicated spaceship. Either a station module or a shelter module or whatever. Basically, see if that will get you into Earth orbit.
Right.
And I think I've actually done several videos on this about how to try to solve the radiation hazard. For the longest time, Musk had said that his initially he was saying, "Oh, we just point a column of water at the sun, and you'll be safe from the radiation on a flight to the moon or Mars and stuff." Well,
Really?
I actually sent him links to articles and videos I produced on this subject, saying no, that's not going to work, because the radiation from the sun is not directional. It's actually it's deflected and carried in all directions by the magnetic field of the sun. You see, the Earth doesn't just have a magnetic field; the sun also has a magnetic field. And so, even if a solar flare shoots away from the Earth, because it curves around all these magnetic field lines, it can get carried back in the direction of the Earth. So you need to have shielding on all sides of the spacecraft. He was actually this was Musk. He was actually at the ISS R&D conference in 2017. He didn't mention me by name, but he says, "I recently learned that you need to have the shielding on all the sides because they follow magnetic." He was literally using the exact same stuff I told him word for word, essentially. Okay,
you need to slam him.
Don't send him anything.
You need to slam him for copyright infringement, man.
Exactly.
You should be suing that guy.
I don't really think I don't think you can copyright a proposal for space travel. But but here's the thing: after that, he released he did another press conference after that where he said back then it was called BFR, Big Falcon Rocket, but he said they will have a solar storm shelter, right? Okay, let's see what the solar storm shelter is. I did some calculations, think, okay, maybe if you have a sphere, something like 2 meters of water, or maybe because you're using what is it called? Stainless steel. Maybe if you had one section thicker than the others, maybe that's what he's doing. Anything. I did theories on how to try and get such a shielder inside that, but he's never revealed what it consists of. And with each revision that comes out, it seems less likely it's going to be able to lift the such a shielder. And in fact, now we know that it can't even get into Earth orbit with what it's got. And so the whole thing needs to be sent back to the drawing board. And this is what NASA is proposing they used to land Artemis on the moon.
And is this? Do you assume we're actually looking at a latter-day Howard Hughes and a spruce goose here?
Yeah, definitely.
It sort of feels like that. I'm just getting a lot of money out of government contracts.
Well, people are getting contracts,
and I'm rolling this thing because in reality, we're talking now. Now we were supposed to be back on the moon, 2020, 2022. This year we were supposed to be back there. They're now saying 2026.
Nah,
but there's got to have to be, what is there? How many flights of that machine and the fuel up there? We're looking at tens of flights that have to occur. And even in the last one that was deemed successful, it was burning up and melting on re-entry.
Okay. Can I ask you, Jarrah, just this one thing that's always perplexed me? When did
You're scaring me.
No. I'm asking questions about the moon. It's like, I don't know. When did they take the rover up? When did the rover go up to the moon?
The Apollo lunar rover was supposed to be on Apollo 15, which was 1971.
Okay, so yeah. Up until then, it was like everything was so, every pound, every ounce was calculated. Do you know what I mean? And they couldn't take because they needed to have enough room to bring back, moon rocks and blah, blah, blah. So, and then all of a sudden, it didn't change. The Saturn V, the Apollo didn't change, but they were able to put a moon rover on there, which weighed how much? How much did the moon rover weigh?
I don't recall off the top of my head, but the way that it was supposed to be carried to the moon was they would attach it onto the side of the LEM on the descent stage, the lower half of the vehicle that's supposed to be using to land on the moon with. And the idea was that you would pull a landing line and they would come off down like that. The wheels would sprout out the sides, and that was what they were supposed to do. The later flights, they were supposed to get rid of a few of the things considered non-essential from the previous flights, supposedly. You know,
Which
like for example, well, let's see, on the early missions, supposedly they had a big satellite dish erected and the camera on the tripod and stuff. Supposedly you don't need that anymore now because the lunar rover has its own camera, you know, a little remote control camera thing in there to do the recording for you and stuff. So okay, so you just put it on the side of the LEM there, and that was their explanation for that. The
I think taking a dish and a camera off and putting a moon rover, which would weigh significantly
The batteries
more,
would weigh quite a bit.
well, the tires. I mean, come on. You took a couple of things off and you were able to put the moon rover on there and take it up.
And why hasn't Elon Musk actually got these portable moon rovers in the back of the Cybertruck? So you can actually, you know, when you pull your Cybertruck out, you can pick your briefcase up and walk with the rover to your job. I don't know.
All right, I don't know. Anyway,
I just looked it up here. Here's the weight of the rover. That says it weighed about 210 kilos.
Okay. 210 kilos. So do you think that the camera and the dish weighed 210 kilos?
Probably not, but there's also other things supposedly, you know, like experiments here and there and stuff. That's obviously they're not taken on the later flights, but still, the fact of the matter is that I lost my train of thought just now. Right. You know, they had all these plans for more advanced missions than that. You know, they had plans to put bases on the moon eventually and stuff using the same technology. Like one plan that they had was to land the actual third stage of the Saturn V on the moon and use that as a makeshift base. They also had something called the LEM truck. The LEM truck was basically a cargo variant of the lunar module, where instead of the upper stage where the astronauts are supposed to sit inside, you'd have all your things aboard there. You'd even have an even bigger rover, essentially, which was basically pressurized. That's been re-envisioned for Artemis, and of course that's going to be another pipe dream because they can't even get the Starship to work right so far. And,
I don't know. Look, you know, it's none of this stuff actually makes much sense to me, and that's why, you know, I don't want to say that I don't believe that they didn't go to the moon, but it definitely throws up a lot of questions, you know, that I'm like,
and you know what?
I don't know.
I also know that we're lay people and we've got no idea about science. So we're bamboozled by science and we can be sold lots of propaganda by that way. One of the things that always perplexed me is this space race evidently was two major military powers pitted against each other.
That's right.
And the Russians had all the firsts.
Yep.
They had Sputnik.
Yeah.
They had the first man into space.
Yeah.
And why didn't they land human beings on the moon?
Well, this actually traces back to 1963. They had actually told Sir Bernard Lavelle, the British astronomer, you see, he had come to the Soviet Union in 1963. They showed him tours of the facilities, of the telescopes, everything, and they had basically told him that they were postponing manned moon missions indefinitely because they couldn't see any ways of protecting the astronauts the cosmonauts rather. They couldn't see any ways of protecting their cosmonauts from the solar flare hazards that they feared would quickly kill them. And you know, people often say, "Oh, well, the Russian technology they screwed up in there." But if you look at the technology they had, we mentioned the N1 earlier. The N1 was the rocket that was supposed to land them on the moon. That blew up 4 times because it had, as I said, they had no equivalent to the F1 engine, so they had to make do with 30 smaller engines, and so that proved to be very difficult to have. As we've seen with Starship, that proved to be very difficult for the Russians as well. But even notwithstanding the N1 problems, they had other moon proposals. There was Zond, for example. Zond was a stripped-down Soyuz capsule in which, instead of sending into space aboard the R7 rocket, which they use nowadays, of course, and used back then too, the idea was they would stick the Soyuz on a Proton rocket, much more powerful rocket, which would literally send it around the moon and back. And they did that several unmanned flights. In fact, they even sent turtles around the moon. Turtles, I should add, have a much higher resistance to radiation. It's like they specifically chose animals that could harmlessly absorb huge amounts of radiation that would be lethal to humans. They put turtles in there, they put bacteria, they put flies, all these creatures that would be sure to withstand the radiation. They even put a spiderwort plant on there. You know what the nickname for spiderwort plants is?
No, what is
a
it?
Living Geiger counter. A living Geiger counter, because if you expose the spiderwort plant to radiation that could kill you, its stigmas just change color. That's it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. But anyways, they had the Zond, which was supposed to go around the moon and back, and they'd done that prior to Apollo, right? But it was never crewed. And obviously, in fact, when they had preparing a Zond to launch in as early as December 7th of 1968, Alexei Leonov and his crew, they're actually all getting dressed up, ready, trying to lobby the Politburo to let them fly it around the moon and stuff. Hey, we're all dressed up, we're all ready to go. Let's fly this thing. The Politburo put their foot down and said no, because they couldn't, guarantee that they would come back alive.
Right.
And so obviously that was just weeks before Apollo 8, which was supposed to be the first manned flight around the moon by the Americans. And so. And then in the 80s, they had something else. You might remember the Soviet equivalent of the space shuttle, the Buran. Well, the Buran was a bit different to the shuttle, because instead of using the big orange tank with its own engines and side boosters, the Buran shuttle literally hitched a ride on the Energia rocket, which was this gigantic liquid rocket, right? Which that had lunar applications as well. And in fact, the guy who built it, his name was Glushko. He had plans for his own moon missions. The idea was he would use one Energia to launch the mothership, which would carry 5 people, and you'd use another rocket to launch a lunar lander, which could fit about 3 people. And the idea was that you would send them both up towards the moon. They would dock in lunar orbit, and you would try to come down to the moon. And that was literally one of the proposals back in those days, back in the 80s. And again, never realized. Nothing ever happened of it.
Never eventuated.
And it all boils down to that conversation that the Soviet Academy of Sciences, his name was Keldysh, had with Simona Lavelle. We can't see any ways to protect our astronauts from the solar flares. Go tell NASA. We're spreading our missions until we can do that, so we can see ways of solving the issue. And you look at all these proposals, not one of them has the meter of shielding to bring their radiation down to safe levels in the Van Allen belts. They don't have any kind of shielding to bring it down to safe levels from solar flares. And so, nothing, road not traveled, essentially.
Yeah, well, yeah. Anyway, okay.
Does it feel like where you are intellectually and what you're looking at, is it a lonely place? Because there's very few people, especially credentialed people in the world, that are willing to actually come forward publicly and state that they see this as, problematic. There must be, a handful of individuals like David Percy and Bart Sabrell and yourself, and they are really castigated for actually coming up with the counterpoint. And I think, look, this is just, if they were why are they so worried about the counterpoint if it is so few people? I'm sorry, I've given you a double question there. But why is there so much noise around the signal of this counterpoint when so few people are saying it? And is it a lonely place to be, Jarrah?
Well, like I said in the beginning, and as I said to my peers and my professors, I don't care that I'm a scientific minority. And in fact, I learned this actually in university and stuff. You can voice a theory that may not be considered popular or accepted by the others and stuff. And I want to give you an example of such. I was doing as part of my geology course, one time they gave us a bunch of papers to look at regarding the Allen Hills meteorite, which was the Mars meteorite that supposedly had nanofossils in there. We had to evaluate all this material, say, okay, do we think there was life in there, or do you think it's a misidentification? And I lent into the latter category about it being a misidentification. And that's a whole different topic in and of itself. But while reading through the papers, I also found papers that suggested that this rock was was actually a diogenite, which is a meteorite from asteroid Vesta. The HED group meteorites are from asteroid Vesta. There's the howardite, the eucrite, and the diogenite. It basically refers to one's a breccia, one's a basalt, and one's a gabbro. You can look up what that means. But the point is
I'll
that
have to.
I'll take your word
the point,
for it.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Well, the point of the matter is and stuff, as I was reading through the papers and stuff, I noticed that there was, originally was thought to be from Vesta, and I started to lean towards that, to those original theories as well. And I included a little sub-note in my report that I believe the original identification of this being from Vesta was correct. And I expected to get maybe marked down for this or that and stuff, but no. The professor, he gave me full marks, and he said, "I disagree with your diogenite theory, but I appreciate the citation, the references, and all that." On a similar manner and stuff, I actually did a report on a later subject. I did a report on tektites. Tektites are these glassy objects which are formed when a meteor crashes into the Earth. It sends all this molten rock and glass up into the sky, up into space, and it falls back down to the Earth as these glassy fragments. Now, interestingly enough, there was a huge back and forth after the Apollo missions that whether or not tektites were from the moon, because some of the glacier components of the Apollo rocks were very similar in composition to tektites. And so, hint, hint. And so it's difficult to talk about tektites without talking about the lunar origin theory of them. And in my case, my minority position, because obviously, if it looks like a tektite and has a composition of a tektite, well, it's probably a tektite. That's probably why you found them in your rock samples there, Hint, hint. Right. And so,
yep.
And so I included, I did my detailed report on tektites, and I included a passage basically, with my own analysis of the Apollo samples, of the Chang'e 3 samples. I had actually analyzed the data that they had published on their website, and came to the conclusion that they were different. Different chemically and mineralogically to the Apollo samples. The Chinese, they released their own paper some years later. They came up with different numbers. I assume it was because the data they released was incomplete. And so either way, they still concluded that the rocks were different from the Apollo samples. And so that was all in my paper. I was explaining the reason why these glasses from Apollo resemble tektite is possibly because they used tektite glass in their fake rocks. Well, I expected to be marked down, for voicing a unpopular theory, but guess what? 100 out of 100. 100 out of 100 for this report. And in fact, literally, I kid you not, the next day I came to class, the teacher, she was like practically like almost worshiping me. Like, that report was so detailed, so perfect, so well written, all this sort of stuff. Nothing, no downgrade or anything like that for the voicing a unpopular theory. But here, there's your full marks. You did a good job with your report. And so the moral of that story is basically to make your case. Your peers may agree with you, they may not, but the important thing is to actually make your case. You have to cite all the data, you have to present all the data. Yes.
And that's why it really frustrates me that there's so much anger. It's like the people that err on the side of this being a...
Oh, I think we lost you. Let me try this again. lost you. Hello.
Oh,
Obviously, that was our man from Bad Astronomy. No, someone tried to cut
I
us
don't
off.
know what
I'm
happened
glad
then.
you stayed there.
That's bizarre.
That is the weirdest thing we've experienced in doing 91 podcasts.
Did we disappear and you were still on
You
there?
disappeared. I was trying to get to what happened. At first, I thought I had disconnected, but I could still see the timer going on, and I don't know what happened.
Well,
we logged in and out several times.
I don't know what happened. We were
Kaysing
just
actually
sitting
mentioned something
here.
happened.
I don't know
Go
what
ahead.
happened. We just
I'll
collapsed.
tell you something that happened once on a different radio show and stuff. Kaysing actually mentioned this in his book. Once he was doing a radio show for KOME, and about halfway through the program, somebody from a helicopter dropped napalm on the transmitter, trying to cut the story off. And so,
Really? I don't think that happened. We don't have a transmitter, but anyway, I don't know what happened. I
can't feel napalm around me. Just go down to those stills. We won't keep you much long, Jarrah.
Just in case.
You've been astounding, and I'm so sorry about that. But you know what? If we can insert a sign in the middle of that blank spot there, which was for about 5 minutes or so, we'll just state, okay, they're out to get us. We're really onto something here. I know it full time.
They're trying to shut us down.
So what was the point we're at? I'm trying to remember. It was, being that lone individual screaming into the wind.
Yeah.
How many people do you assume with some credentials out there and a scientific understanding, because we're just the lay proletariat here, why won't they go and look at this in the detail that you have? What is the problem?
I guess it comes down to a number of things. Like some people like to be, they look to the Apollo moon missions as a sense of national pride. If you're in the United States, for sure, it's considered as the greatest technological achievement. And in the case of Australians, in fact, I actually remembered having this discussion with one of my interviewees and stuff. He said that, I think that Australia is one of the reasons we know that Apollo happened, because we had the Parkes Observatory, we had this and that. That was our contribution to the thing. And well, to that I say, well, how do you know that they didn't pull a Zonda? The Americans, how do you know they didn't pull a Zonda 5 on you? That Zonda, the Turtles flight I mentioned earlier, that was transmitting cosmonaut voices during the thing, which initially duped people into thinking that the mission was manned, which that there, so it's demonstrated how proof of concept how to fake a mission to the moon such a radio operation to be fooled. And I guess that's what it comes down to. I guess nobody really wants to for lack of a better term, man up and say, okay, I was fooled by NASA, I was fooled by this and that, and so, and it I think in the long term and stuff, possibly after, there's not many of the Apollo astronauts left in the world, and I think probably it will either be in a confession by the last one left alive, or it will probably come out sometime after then, after everybody involved is dead, and there's no one to be called in for questioning or held accountable for this or that, and so that will probably pretty much. Well, by then it'll be taken up by new people and stuff. None of the people who are involved will be there anymore. So
here's the thing: you just said, this was one of the most amazing technical achievement by man ever. Yet you're telling us you don't have the telemetry, you don't have the schematics, you don't have any of the information of, you kept all that stuff. It was such an important thing that was done, that now you just threw everything out. That just doesn't make any sense. It'd be like, the Holy Grail, all that information, all that research, all those schematics, all those plans, all the, they would have kept that under lock and key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They would have.
Yeah, you think they would have, but they don't. And that's the other thing that really perplexes me. It's like, if it was such an important achievement, it was the pinnacle, that's the apex of technical achievement, right? Because even today we can't do it, but yet they chucked everything out.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to leave it on that note.
You know what? Also, the other thing I was going to ask you about is, look at this Starliner incident and Boeing. What is going on here? Have we got two astronauts lost in space, trapped on the ISS, or
I wouldn't really call them lost in space. call them basically stranded up there until they get the next vehicle up there. They're waiting. There's been having some helium leaks in the spacecraft, and they wanted to make sure they can try to fix the leaks before they can get the spacecraft down there. If we're, at the moment they're saying that it's not going to be an issue to the safety of the crew or the mission and stuff, but as we said before, the American aerospace has a bit of a habit of sweeping things under the rug and trying to make things more rosy to the consumers and to the public and whatnot.
Of course.
And so, if worse comes to worse, what they can do is they can send the Starliner down there unmanned. See if it survives the re-entry and stuff. If it doesn't, well, better be safe than sorry. You've still got two healthy astronauts up there in the space station.
Sure.
And you can send a SpaceX Dragon to come and get them. On the later days, their plan was to have two types of spacecraft, ferrying astronauts to and from the space station. They started with Dragon, and Starliner was supposed to be the new one that's going up there now. And now, obviously, it's run into some issues, and only time will tell, I guess, if they can iron out those problems.
Okay.
They just Boeing today, actually, on a United Airlines flight on a 757. Out of LAX, I think, lost a
week
wheel.
and a half ago. A week and a half ago.
Was it? No, I think it was an incident today.
We're a week and a half late.
Oh, well, we are. Yeah, right. Okay, sorry. I've forgotten we're in the future here. You don't need to correct me.
A week and a half ago.
What do we do with this? I mean, what do we do at the end of the day? What is the future for you? Are you just going to be screaming into the wind? What is happening? Are you going to write a book on this? Are you going to go out there and publicly lecture? What does the future feel like for you being this person, in a sense, who is the gatekeeper to those original Mavericks, Bill Kaysing and Ralph Rene?
Well, if anybody wants a lecture from me, they know where to find me. They can find me on my website, my email address, and all that.
Yep.
And I'd be happy to speak and give talks about this subject. If anybody wants to interview me and stuff, they know where to find me. And as I said, when I first wrote my response to astronomy and all the other places, I had written an essay which was literally the size of a phone book, and in the long run I might actually write up a book and see if I can get that published. In fact, I've actually been working on a new edition of Ralph Rene's book with some appendixes added to bring it up to date with some more some stuff that has happened since he left this world in 2008. And there's a lot of has happened since then. There's been a lot of new discoveries and new issues that have been happening in the space race, the new space race, I should say, and that'll hopefully be out later next year. Hopefully, we'll see what happens. I was hoping to get that one out in time for the 30th anniversary of when Ralph Rene's book was first published, but we had a death in the family around that time, and
right.
We're still kind of licking our wounds from that. And but of course, of course, you asked like how I feel like being a what was the phrase you used?
A solo voice screaming in the wind there,
Or the
like I said, it all comes down to making your case. You might convince your peers, you might convince your professors, you might not, but the important thing is to make your case. And besides which, of course, I have a life aside from the Moon Landing Hoax, of course. Like I've got a new book coming up, which is that Trojan Smersh Sid Tanner thriller, and that is the start of a new era, I hope. And, yep, there it is, right there. That's the start of a new era. I had wrote those stories back when I was back in the early 2000s. I wrote those to entertain my step grandfather. Then January 6th comes along. I finally found time during COVID. I finally found time to revisit those stories.
Right.
And when the January 6th insurrection happened, there was an idea struck me, and that from that came Trojan Smersh. It starts off with the premise of the story is that our lead character Sid Tanner, a ex-ASIS agent and former Space Force astronaut, has been targeted by the CIA and Smersh certainly an attempt is made on his life, and he follows the clues, which leads him to this conspiracy involving the Trump administration and SMERSH. The premise is that there was something far more sinister planned for the January 6th insurrection, which I have to remain tight-lipped about, of course, but put that out in the book, what the sinister plan was.
That's right,
And
nobody will
so that's the start of a new era, I hope. I plan to get more of my Sid Tanner stories out, and I plan to get more moon faker videos out. I plan to get more. I'd like to produce another video about the latest progress, or lack of progress, I should say, with Starship, with what's been happening. As I said before, I used to produce many videos, following the Starship, everything that was what they were saying in the media, what was being proposed, all the roadblocks they hit. Oh, well, let's point a column of water at the sun. No, you can't do it that way. Okay, I learned somewhere that we do it this way and stuff like that. And so that there's many videos. You can look up my YouTube channel. I did several videos on that subject. I would like to produce a new one to cover everything that's happened since. And of course, I'll have more articles on Ollis, to be published. Soon enough. I got several ideas in my head to write up. I've got several topics I'd like to talk about, and we'll see how that goes. And possibly in the long run, yes, I probably will write a maybe Moonfaker the book version. I guess we'll see what happens.
Okay.
Time will tell.
Sounds good.
We'll certainly be right
Watching
there
out
for
for
the
those
first
things to
to
come out.
purchase those books. And I'm
Absolutely.
going to put links to the Ellis site and to the Sid Tanner book. I think there's a series there for Netflix with Sid Tanner, honestly. And I also believe
I'll tell you a secret about the Sid Tanner thing. When I got the feedback from the publisher, they actually likened my style of writing. They likened it to Ian Fleming's James Bond and also
Is
The
that
Bourne
right?
Identity, which
Okay.
yeah.
wow. Well,
There
there
you
you go. You're really onto something. Jarrah, you are a real gentleman. And look, back in the birth of like DC and alternating current,
Mhm.
if you took Edison for his word, then we'd be living in perpetual darkness. Now, there was a lot of people that sort of had a problem with the notion of alternate current, and you had Edison out there trying to say it's not going to work. He was doing things like electrocuting elephants.
Mhm.
So science is all about counterpoints.
Mhm.
I mean, the whole notion of quantum physics has many levels of scientists that believe in very different ways of approaching that subject.
Sure.
And they all tolerate each other in the search for an improvement in the way that we perceive the natural world around us. And I think, Jarrah, you are more than worthy of all the material you put out there. You certainly give people so much information and references to check it out for themselves.
That's right.
And as far as I'm concerned, we should be more interested in the people around us than those things that are outside off planet. There is more than enough issues we have to deal with here.
Mm.
I don't think we should take the human conundrum any further than we should. And I was a child born in that space race. I looked at the LEM and I was really disappointed that it wasn't the C-57D intergalactic saucer that I saw in Forbidden Planet.
Yes.
It was this hokey looking device that was going. I was thinking, why isn't space travel more exciting and eloquent?
More stylized.
Yeah, like what I'm seeing on the silver screen.
Yeah.
But I still brought into it at the time. But I've
Mm.
always had questions about the reality of it. And it's been an absolute pleasure spending time with you. So thank you so much for being part of episode 91 of Down South Anomalies. That was a very interesting middle bit there.
It was.
I'll have to go outside and check if there's any napalm on the roof. All right.
All right.
Thank you, Jarrah.
Thanks, Jarrah. On this, the eve or
Of
the eve of the 55th anniversary of the moon landing.
Where in the hell is it going to go? I guess the truth will be exposed soon enough, or maybe not.
Who knows?
We'll see what happens.
Who
Tomorrow
knows?
I'll be seeing the movie, and I'll give you my feedback on that perhaps on a later program. We'll see what happens.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You'll always be a return guest for us. We're very proud and honored to have you on the program, and take good care. We'll speak soon.
All right, kids. We'll be back next week with God knows what. Okay. Bye.